or not yet?
Yeah, I think let's get started. It's just a couple minutes after 3, so we can get going. And I want to thank all of our participants for joining us today. And I want to introduce Todd Caldwell, the University of Texas, Bureau of Economic Geology. And Todd, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Welcome to everyone. As Emily just mentioned, thanks for logging in and listening to this live. It'll be recorded and available to hear anytime from here on out. This series is called the Western U.S. Drought on the Ground and from Space, combining in situ and remotely sensed data. We're trying to extend that traditional concept of drought here, of just being scarce precipitation, to being more of a hydrologic event. And we have 5 really good speakers. Steve Quering came on last week and talked about the soil moisture networks. Today, Bridget's going to talk about GRACE. Bridget is a senior research scientist here at the Bureau of Economic Geology, also part of the University of Texas at Austin. She's going to present a lot of really good data on how to use GRACE and how we can sort of combine these in situ measurements and remotely sensed data to come up with a better picture of drought across the U.S. So with that, I'll let Bridget get going.
So I hope you can see the slides. Appreciate the opportunity to talk today about GRACE and ground-based monitoring and modeling data to evaluate drought impacts on water resources. I'd like to acknowledge the people that I work with, Zhishang Zhang, Himanshu Save, and Jianli Chen from UT Center for Space Research that work on the GRACE data. Former postdocs from our group, Di Long, now at Tsinghua, and Laurent Longvern at University of Rennes. Co-workers Bob Reedy and Todd Caldwell, who you just heard, and then USGS folks, Don Poole and Claudia Font. With regards to the series, I try to combine remote sensing data from GRACE and ground-based monitoring and modeling data. It seems like there's a lot of discussion these days about these topics. So on the top here you see Mike Watkins, now Director for Center for Space Research here at the university, and Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes talking about GRACE. And Sasha Ritchie's paper on groundwater aquifers in distress, about a third of global large groundwater aquifers in distress, and the California drought impacts that Jake Famietti has been reporting on recently. I thought 60 Minutes did a nice overview combining both remote sensing and from GRACE and also the value of ground-based monitoring with Claudia Font representing ground-based monitoring the state. And then just recently, we had a commentary from Bill Alley and Lenny Konikow at the USGS, bringing GRACE down to earth, talking about the issues with using GRACE data to evaluate regional groundwater resource issues. I think it's not a duking out between remote sensing and ground-based monitoring and modeling. We really need to use all of the data that we can get our hands on to try to understand the impacts of droughts and floods on water resources and how we can try to better manage these. I'd like to acknowledge the people at UT who were instrumental in getting the GRACE program going initially, Byron Tapley, the former director at Center for Space Research, and also Clark Wilson, and I've learned a great deal from talking to these folks. So the outline of what I'm going to talk about today, I'll try to present some information on using the GRACE satellite data, and then the basic ground-based monitoring and modeling approaches that we use, and then present some maps of GRACE data for the US during the recent droughts, and case studies for the Texas 2011 drought and the Colorado River Basin and this California Central Valley region. So many of you are familiar with the GRACE satellites. GRACE stands for Gravity, Recovery and Climate Experiment. Some people these days may consider it a religion, but I don't think it's supposed to be. It was launched on St. Patrick's Day in March 2002, and the satellites are about 450 kilometers above the land surface and about 220 kilometers apart. It's
really quick?
Yes.
So you're not advancing any slides right now.
Oh.
Are you still doing an intro? Or
No.
is it not? Are you trying to advance slides and it's not working?
I'm advancing slides and I guess it's not working. I'm on slide.
Hold on just a second. So let's see. I'm gonna hide this. So it's not coming up. The slides aren't coming up.
Slideshow.
Try escaping, I guess, maybe. Do you see just the blank screen now, Emily?
Oh, sorry. Do you just see a blank screen right now, Emily?
It still says share my screen. It's still blank. Yes.
And now,
Try to, maybe we're not
display settings.
You saw the opening slide, though?
You just saw Todd's slide, did you? Did you just see Todd's slide?
No. No, I had the PDF version that I uploaded that was showing, but the.
Share my screen. Share the screen.
There you go. Now it's coming up.
How's that?
Okay,
now you're on the GRACE mission slide. Looks good.
Okay, I'm just going to flip back through a few of the others without. So here I just give the title and the other people working with me in the various institutions. And here we talked just briefly about how GRACE is in the news, different things going on with the drought, global groundwater issues, and the recent commentary by Bill Alley and Lenny Conoco in Groundwater. So this is the outline I'll follow, talking about the GRACE satellite data, ground-based monitoring, maps of the US, and case studies in Texas, Colorado River Basin, and Central Valley of California. So just showing the GRACE satellites here, 450 kilometers above the land surface, about 220 kilometers apart, and estimating total water storage. Sometimes people refer to these satellites as Tom and Jerry because they chase each other. So how does GRACE work? By measuring the distance between the two satellites, GRACE estimates changes in gravity. The main control on time variable gravity at about monthly scales is variance in water distribution or ice, because water is heavy. So GRACE estimates changes in total water storage that's vertically integrated from the atmosphere to the MOHO. And we can convert gravity change to equivalent water height. People oftentimes refer to equivalent water height or volume at the Earth's surface. For example, 1 gigaton of mass is equivalent to 1 cubic kilometer of water. So I'll talk some more about that later. So what does GRACE see? We can sort of think of GRACE as another set of eyes, but I think more with cataracts. On the top left here, you can see a map of the GRACE data from JPL telesite on total water storage, represented as anomaly, with the red colors indicating depletion relative to the long-term average from 2003 to the present, and the blue areas indicating enormously high values. And it's sort of smooth. So if we look at soil moisture storage from NOAA land surface model, you can see a lot more detail. We can then see what Grace is seeing by truncating the soil moisture data and filtering it, and then we produce something like what Grace is. So we try to get the original signal, and we have sort of a blurred vision of water storage changes. So what is included in total water storage? Water storage, surface reservoir storage, soil moisture storage, and groundwater storage. And in order to isolate any one of these storage changes, then we need to subtract the other components. So we can estimate snow water storage from SNODAS or from global or national land data simulation system models, GLDAS or NLDAS models put forward by NASA. Water storage data are generally monitored in different states. Soil moisture storage, as I said, we can estimate also from GLDAS or NLDAS land surface models. There are 4 land surface models within GLDAS: CLM, Mosaic, NOAA, and VIC, and 3 within NLDAS. And I'll show some of the results for those later. A lot of interest in groundwater storage changes, and to estimate groundwater storage change, we need to subtract snow, reservoir, and soil moisture storage. And so uncertainties in each of these components will be accumulated in a groundwater storage change estimate. Grace products are produced in various centers. The 3 main centers are the University of Texas Center for Space Research, NASA, JPL, and the German group GFZ. The data are put out monthly. Each pass of the satellites in a circumpolar orbit takes about 90 minutes, and it takes about a monthly timescale to get a complete global coverage. The spatial scale, or the spatial footprint, is considered to be about 200,000 square kilometers. And this is based on the elevation of the satellite, which is about 450 kilometers above the land surface. However, Grace can detect Grace is sensitive to mass, and so if you have a concentrated mass, as you have in, say, for example, the 3 gorges, you can detect that. It's basically a signal to noise ratio issue. There are various types of Grace products. Traditionally, we have relied on spherical and one-harmonics products for Grace, which represents Grace global scale using polynomial functions. Lander and Felix Lander and Sean Swenson have recently used a gridded Grace product with their WRR paper describing this in 2012, because most remote sensing data is provided in gridded format. Prior to that, the Grace data were analyzed at a basin scale, like, for example, the Mississippi or the High Plains Aquifer, and generally involved working with geodesists to process the data. So they provide it in a format that hydrologists can use directly. And more recently then, the Masscon's product has become available. And this is just another type of basis function that is fit to the Grace data. And I describe the advantages of the Masscon's product shortly. And JPL just came out with their 3-degree Masscon's product. And the references are shown here. So what's involved in processing the traditional spherical harmonic data? The big measurement is the intersatellite range rate to data, so the distance between the satellites. These are generally noisy, and we need to try to reduce the noise. And we do this by truncating the spherical at maybe degree or order 60 or 120, and then oftentimes applying a Gaussian filter, maybe a 300-kilometer Gaussian filter. The problem is when we reduce the noise, we're also removing some of the signal. And so we want to maximize the noise reduction but minimize the signal loss. And we need to restore the signal. And the main approach that's used to restoring the signal is using scaling factors. These scaling factors are generally determined from applying the same types of processing that we apply to GRACE to land surface models, such as soil moisture storage in land surface models. So truncating to 60 or 120 degrees and filtering using a Gaussian filter. So the scaling factor is dimensionless and represents the ratio between the raw land surface model and the truncated and filtered land surface model. So these scaling factors are greater than 0, and a value of 1 means that the truncation and filtering doesn't have any impact. Greater than 1 means that the basin has lost some signal and we need to amplify the signal by multiplying by a scaling factor greater than 1. We also oftentimes remove the seasonal cycles if we're interested in looking at long-term trends. So that's the processing that's used with spherical harmonic data. The gridded data that Lander and Swenson provide includes grid data, 1 degree gridded data, and also a separate file that includes the scaling factors, and I'll show those shortly. So here is an example of the JPL TELUS gridded product based on CSR raw data for September 2011. And you can see low water storage in Texas and extending east, and basically -5 to +5 centimeters is considered very little change. And a blue area in the central north region. So on the right hand side then you can see a map of the scaling factors that were estimated by applying truncation and filtering to the CLM land surface model, soil moisture storage. And you can see large scaling factors along the coast because there is a lot of leakage of the signal into the ocean, and to restore that then we need these large scaling factors. And then the map on the lower central region then shows the final product after multiplying the raw data by the scaling factors. So you can evaluate the impact of these scaling factors by using this interactive tool at the University of Colorado Boulder, this portal, and they provide interactive maps, global maps, and time series. And here I'm just showing as an example a basin in the western US, and this is the GRACE time series shown in green with the reductions during this period 2006-2009 and then 11 through 14. So that's the raw GRACE data, and the next map shows the scaled GRACE data after multiplying by a scaling factor of 1.65. So this region is near the coast, and so the scaling factor is greater than 1 to recover signal that was lost to the ocean. And they estimated this scaling factor by applying the same processing to the land surface model. The raw model is shown in red, and the truncated and filtered model is shown in orange, and the ratio between the two then gave them an average scaling factor of 1.65. This is a really nice slide to play with different things, play with different smoothing ratios to show the impact on noise reduction and also signal loss. So next I want to talk briefly about the differences between the traditional spherical harmonic product and the more recently developed Masscon's product. So spherical harmonics analysis applies at the global scale, and polynomial fits at the global scale, and so you cannot distinguish between the land and the ocean, and that's why we have many problems with leakage effects from land to the ocean. And then most of the rescaling then requires use of external land surface models to restore the signal, and so uncertainties increase then because you're relying on an external product. The Masscons, on the other hand, uses another form of gravity field basis function to fit to the GRACE intersatellite range observations. And it allows us to apply geophysical constraints at the level 2 processing rather than the empirical post-processing filtering that's done with the spherical harmonics. There are several advantages of the Masscon's approach. It can apply at a regional or a local scale. You can delineate the land and the oceans with a priori data. It has a higher signal to noise ratio, and the CSR product is purely driven by GRACE data without use of external models. JPL applies CSM to downscale from their 3-degree data. And you can check for signal loss then by doing a post-bit residuals against the original GRACE range rate data, and to make sure that you've captured all the signal within the resolution of the GRACE data. And Himanshu Save works a lot on this product for Center for Space Research, and as I said, JPL just came out with their product recently. So this is an example map for September 2011 of the JPL Masscons product, and you can see that we don't have a problem with the land ocean, and they apply a filter with the Masscons that extend from the land to the ocean to correct for problems there. It's a 3-degree product, and they have a total of about 4,500 equal area cells. And then because there's inherent smoothing associated with this 3-degree product, they use CLM land surface then to try to pick up signals at higher spatial resolution. And on the right then you see the scaling factors that would be used to get to a 0.5 degree resolution. And you can see that these scaling factors are much lower, 0, 1, 1 to 2, relative to what we saw for the spherical harmonic product. And on the lower center, then you can see the results of multiplying the scaling factor with the raw data to get the 0.5 degree resolution results. Himanshu Save's product then, CSR Masscon solution, is a 1-degree product, and it's about 41,000 equal area cells globally, and that's an order of magnitude higher than the JPL product, and it's probably much more computationally expensive, but Himanshu works with the TAC Computing Center here, and I think they have some extraordinary computing power. So the average area of a cell then is about 12,500 square kilometers. And so he doesn't use any scaling factors or any external land surface models with this product. So I've talked about the GRACE satellite data and the water storage changes provided by that. Now I'd like to briefly discuss ground-based monitoring and modeling data to look at water storage changes. So the snow water storage, the SNOWTEL network, reservoir storage, we have pretty good coverage in the US and monitored by state and federal agencies. So moisture storage, the USDA SCAN network that we heard last week from Steve Quiring is not very dense and hopefully will be expanded in the future. I'm going to emphasize groundwater storage because there's a lot of emphasis on groundwater storage using GRACE data, and talk about groundwater level monitoring data, ground-based gravity data, little, and regional groundwater modeling. So there are a lot of monitoring networks that monitor groundwater levels, and trying to convert a groundwater level to groundwater storage, you need some information on a storage coefficient, and these storage coefficients vary depending on whether you're dealing with an unconfined aquifer where you have a water table that's connected to the atmosphere, or whether you're dealing with a confined aquifer, which I'll show in the next slides. So an example of an unconfined aquifer is the High Plains or Ogallala aquifer, and the typical storage coefficients are specific yield in this case would be about 0.15 for the high plains, or 15%. It's a dimensionless unit. So if we have a 1 meter change in water level in the high aquifer, that would be equivalent to 0.15 meter change in groundwater storage. So 0.15 meters would be the equivalent water height or water thickness. So this contrasts with the confined aquifer then that's separated from the atmosphere with a confining layer, and wells that are in confined aquifers, the water level may rise above the top of the confining layer. And if we measure head changes or water level changes in these wells, converting it to groundwater storage, we need a storage coefficient. One of the big differences between unconfined and confined aquifers is the value of the storage coefficient. So a typical value of storage coefficient in a confined aquifer is about a couple of orders of magnitude less than those in unconfined aquifers. So here, just as an example, I assume a value of 0.001 or 0.1%. So a 1 meter water level change would correspond to a 1 millimeter change in groundwater storage or equivalent water height. So the problem when we're trying to convert water level changes to groundwater storage, looking at water level data, sometimes we don't know if wells are completed in unconfined aquifers, semi-confined aquifers, or confined aquifers. So it makes it difficult to invert the data to groundwater storage. For example, in the California Central Valley, this is a map in the California's groundwater update, their plan update, and you can see water level changes in the Central Valley with the large depletions in the Tulare Lake region here. And in this example, they have specific yields or storage coefficients for unconfined aquifers ranging from 0.7 to 0.17. And this is the change in groundwater level from spring 2005 to 2010. And you can see the effect of these different storage coefficients then on the groundwater storage changes. So the blue is a low storage coefficient of 0.07, and the green is a higher storage coefficient of 0.17. So you see a large amplitude change with the higher storage coefficient. So that just gives you an example of the uncertainty in the storage coefficients and its impact on groundwater storage estimation from water level monitoring. The other thing that we can look at is groundwater pumpage data, and the USGS compiles data from the states, and the states collect data on groundwater use. And so this puts an estimate on anthropogenic groundwater storage that we can use to constrain estimates with GRACE data. And the water use data for 2010. And also we can use output from regional groundwater modeling. Here I show examples of the USGS regional model for the Central Valley that Claudia Font put together and is now revising, and I think the revised version should be coming out in the near future. On the upper right I show regional groundwater models for different regions in Arizona, put out by the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and in the lower right show groundwater availability modeling that the state of Texas Water Development Board has been doing for the last 10-15 years. So these can help us look at, provide data on groundwater storage changes also. So we've talked about the remote sensing and the ground-based monitoring and modeling data. So next I'd like to show you maps of GRACE water storage changes in the US over time, and before I talk about the case studies. So here I just marched through the recent few years of data to show you expansion and contraction of droughts in different regions. And these are output from the CSR Masscon's approach produced by Himanshu Savy and others at CSR. And so this is February 2010, and we see enormously high water storage throughout much of central and eastern US, with values of maybe 20 to 30 centimeters in this region here. And this is August 2010. The seasonal fluctuations have not been removed from this, so some years that have large seasonal fluctuations will come across ranging from blue to red without being a true drought. And so you can see enormously low storage in this region and this region, and higher storage here. So then December 2010, February 2011, and April 2011, we can see low storage building up over the Texas region and also in the Florida region. And June 2011, expansion of this enormously low storage around Texas. And then August 2011, large-scale drought in southeastern US. And then October 2011. So next I'll show you the US drought monitor, and you can see that most of the state of Texas is in D4 or exceptional drought in October 2011. So the drought in Texas in 2011 covered most of the state under exceptional drought. In the summer of 2011, outside was like going into a convection and extremely dry, and about $8 billion worth of agricultural losses. So moving forward then December 2011, February 2012, June 2012, again building back up drought conditions, and you can also see drought beginning in California region and the western US. August 2012. Then this is the time that we had a large regional drought in the Midwest, sometimes referred to as a flash drought. And here you can see August 12 from the US Drought Monitor with D4 conditions throughout central Midwest region and over this entire area. So December 2012, April 2013, again Texas and California, and then some parts of the Colorado basin in this region. October 2013, you can see drought conditions intensifying in California and continuing in Texas. And here's the drought monitor for October 2013. You don't see a lot of D4 conditions and some D3, but doesn't seem to be extremely intense drought based on the drought monitor. February 2014, August 2014, again intense in California, and here you can see much of California under D4 exceptional drought conditions in August 2014, and Texas not so bad. October 2014, December 2014, April 2015, again intense drought in California and also the southern part of the High Plains Aquifer region. And here you can see intense droughts in California and this region also. So next I'd like to discuss a couple of case studies, a few case studies, starting with the results from Texas. And as we just saw, the 2011 drought in Texas that had extended through 2015, it was just broken in May 2015 with flooding events. So in October 2011, 90% of the state was under exceptional drought conditions and 97% under D3-4 conditions, extreme to extreme drought. And here from the National Drought Monitor, the time series from 2000 to 2016, and the 2011 drought really stands out as being extreme drought, and drought conditions persisting until May 2015, when we had flooding. So you either have no water or too much water because of droughts and floods. So here we show Grace total water storage time series and compare it with the precipitation in the. This is based on work, extension of work that D. Long did when he was here as a postdoc. So this is the total water storage time series highs, and this is in cubic kilometers over the state. And you can see highs in 2005, 2007, 2010, and this is the 2011 drought, the lowest total water storage over the record, and then recovery in fall, spring 2012, and then decreasing again to low values until the recent recovery in spring 2015. And this is the precipitation record, and you can see generally good correspondence between the total water time series and the precipitation time series. A big decline in 2011 of precipitation, about 40% of the long-term average precipitation in the state. And this was the results from D. Long's paper in GRL, showing the relationship between GRACE data from two different products, the blue and the black lines, with the errors shown in grey, and then the Palmer Drought Severity Index in red, showing generally good correspondence between the GRACE time series and the drought indicator PDSI, and about an estimated 60 cubic kilometers in total water storage depletion in 2011. So we've extended those data to the recent time period, and again you can see the PDSI doesn't recover as much as the GRACE TWS, but generally a good correspondence, and then PDSI seems to increase before we see an increase in total water storage from GRACE. So looking at soil moisture storage, and so what is making up this total water storage change in Texas? We have monitored the reservoir storage, and that's about 8 cubic kilometers of depletion during the 2011 drought. And then we also looked at the soil moisture storage, because oftentimes we estimate groundwater storage from GRACE by subtracting soil moisture storage. So this is put from the NOAA land surface model, one of the GLDAS models, and you can see depletion in soil moisture storage from 2004 through 2012 in this graph. And then this is the mosaic data, both showing large amplitude. This is the CLM model output showing much lower amplitude in soil moisture storage change over time, and the VIC model. So if we use the average then of all these models, so we get this line showing changes in soil moisture storage. So if we subtract reservoir storage and soil moisture storage, we can estimate groundwater storage. And here we have subtracted the average of all those GLDAS land surface models, and this is what we get. And this is a moving average then, showing the depletion during the 2011 drought and continued depletion as the drought persisted through 2014. And this is the NLDAS, National Land Data Simulation System, average of their land surface models. And this is the moving average of those data. So you can see the difference that we see in groundwater storage depending on whether we use GLDAS or NLDAS land surface models. So if we summarize then, we can estimate groundwater storage depletion for 2010 to 2011 ranging from 30 to 60 kilometers depending on which land surface model, so moisture storage we use to subtract from the GRACE data. And 2010 through 2013, 50 to 70 cubic kilometers. Our estimates of groundwater in the state average about 12 cubic kilometers per year. So these values exceed that, and so we know it's either deeper soil moisture storage, below the 2 meters that's covered by the land surface models are natural groundwater depletion related to drought, riparian evapotranspiration, or base flow to streams during drought conditions. And then I'd like to emphasize the area of Texas is about 700,000 square kilometers. So even though these numbers look very large, up to 70 cubic kilometers, 70 cubic kilometers corresponds to 100 millimeters when you divide by the area of the state, or 4 inches of water. So you can think that maybe that could readily be accommodated by more soil moisture storage evaporation. Because of the large uncertainties in soil moisture storage, then it's really important that we put more emphasis on monitoring soil moisture storage. And Todd Caldwell in our group is working on the SMAP data and SMAP soil moisture active passive satellite data for soil moisture using a ground-based network with 41 stations monitoring soil moisture down to a depth of 50 centimeters. And I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that in the near future. But I think the results that we've shown for Texas, the better understanding of the soil moisture storage would really help us constrain estimates of groundwater storage from GRACE data. So next I talk about the Colorado River Basin, looking at data for that. And Castle and others have estimated groundwater depletion for this basin in the past, and so we revisited it looking at it more ground-based data for the GRACE data. So Colorado River Basin is about 660,000 square kilometers in area. The upper basin shown in this region here is responsible for about 80% of the stream flow generation from the snowmelt in these mountains. And the lower basin then is this region here. It mostly corresponds to the state of Arizona. They have a lot of large reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Total reservoir storage capacity is about 80 cubic kilometers. So when we're looking at water storage changes, they reflect the balance between inputs and outputs. So you can consider it as water supply versus demand. And so if we have a reduction in water storage, does it reflect a decrease in the water inputs or the supply, or is it a result of an increase in water outputs or water demand? And then we also need to keep in mind that variations in inputs and outputs can be either natural in response to natural wet and dry climate cycles, or anthropogenically driven by variations in groundwater pumpage. So when we look at the data for the Colorado River Basin, these are consumptive use and losses reports by the US Bureau of Reclamation, and for the upper and lower basin. And you can see here that the total consumptive uses and losses in the upper basin from 1971 to 2013 average about 5 cubic kilometers, and they don't vary a lot over time. And in the lower basin, they're more than double that, and we don't see a lot of variations over time in the lower basin either. So it seems like the variations may reflect more water input to the system rather than variations in water output, particularly from consumptive use and losses. And the green color reflects irrigation, and the red is municipal water use, with much more municipal water use in the lower basin with the cities of Phoenix and Tucson, etc. So looking at total water storage from GRACE data, then we extended the time series of total water storage back in time to 1980 by summing up reservoir storage, snow water storage, and soil moisture storage from the land surface models. So this is an estimated total water storage. And the light grey line is the seasonal fluctuation, and the darker line is the 12-month moving average for the upper Colorado River Basin. So you can see declines during drought periods before 1990, about 31 cubic kilometers, around the year 2000, before GRACE monitoring began in 2003, of about 42 cubic kilometers, and then almost 30 cubic kilometers during recent drought period around 2011, 12, 13. So then looking at the reservoir storage, you can see declines during these periods, sort of lagging the total water storage but also having a significant contribution to the total water storage. And also, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, the red in this plot here reflects the GRACE monitoring data, and you can see a pretty good correspondence between GRACE data and the estimated water storage change from snow, reservoir and soil moisture. So we don't have any groundwater storage, but we approximate the GRACE data, so it suggests that groundwater storage does not have a big impact on total water storage in the upper basin. And this would be consistent with the fact that they use their water use in the upper basin, 95% is surface water based. So here you can see the reservoir storage, and this is the soil moisture storage, again showing depletion during drought periods before 1990, around 2000, and then the recent drought period. And then looking at the variation, you can see wet and dry climate cycles at sort of decadal time intervals. So severe droughts at almost decadal intervals around 1990, early 2000s, and early 2010 period. And in between these drought periods, then we have wet periods, mid to late 80s, throughout much of the 90s, and only a very anomalous wet period in 2005 in the recent period. So in the lower Colorado River Basin, then I won't walk through data, but I just summarize it. The total water storage, we have 55 cubic kilometers of depletion in the drought around 1990, and again in similar water storage depletion in the drought in the 2000s, and 20 cubic kilometers from the GRACE data in the recent drought. And we have the contributions from the reservoirs, soil moisture and groundwater storage. So groundwater storage is important contributor to total water storage in the lower basin. And again, you can see drought periods around 1990, and almost drought conditions since the late 90s to the present, with only one anomalously wet year in 2005. So groundwater storage estimated as residual from GRACE data for the recent drought is about 20 cubic kilometers. If we take low GRACE total water storage using the different products and a high soil moisture storage from one of the land surface models, we estimate a groundwater storage depletion of 5 to 11 cubic kilometers. If we do the opposite, then taking a high GRACE total water storage and a low soil moisture storage, we get a range from about 19 to 31 cubic kilometers. So that gives you an idea of the range of uncertainty using different GRACE products and using different land surface models to estimate soil moisture. So we can also look at the ground-based data, and as earlier with the GRACE data, we didn't really need groundwater storage to contribute to the total water storage in the upper basin. So this is the upper basin, and these red points are where we monitor groundwater levels. And you can see that we don't see large declines in groundwater levels during the recent droughts, and these data extend from 1970 to 2013. So no evidence also for groundwater depletion from the groundwater level records. In the lower basin, then, we have much more monitoring of groundwater levels, and Don Poole compiled these data for Arizona. And the purple area shows minimally developed regions, and the dense regions here correspond to Phoenix and Tucson, and these are called active management areas where there's been a lot of groundwater depletion in the past. So here we show the composite hydrograph with all the data, and you see increases in groundwater storage during the wet periods in the 80s, and then decline during the 90s drought, increases during the wet periods in the 90s, and then declines during the early 2000s, and then increase here around 2005, and then decline during the recent drought. So most of these changes can be explained by the storage changes in the minimally developed areas, because that represents about 75% of the area. And when we area weight the water storage changes, that's the dominant contributor, and that responds to the wet climate cycles. The active management areas then, even though there's a more intense pumpage and stuff, because they represent a small fraction of the area, they don't contribute a lot to water storage. We do see an input from agricultural areas where they don't have access to surface water. So these data show that the managed aquifer recharge and conjunctive use in the active management areas since the Groundwater Management Act in 1980 has helped with groundwater storage changes. So Don Poole also looked at ground-based strategy, and this is a network of stations in Tucson, about 200 stations. And from these data then he saw is in water storage in 2000 period, and a large increase in 2005 that reflected mostly soil moisture, and then that depleted with evaporation of the soil moisture, and then continued increase. So ground gravity responds to soil moisture storage and groundwater storage, and with nearby groundwater level data then he could disaggregate the components from soil moisture and groundwater storage. So again, a lot of variability in soil moisture storage from the land surface models. And if we look at as I mentioned earlier, we can estimate different ranges in water storage depending on which land surface model we use. So lastly, I want to talk very briefly then about the Central Valley region in California. And this is the current map from the US Drought Monitor. 46% of the state in exceptional drought and 71% in extreme to exceptional drought. You can see the time series, 2007 to 2009 or 10 drought, and then this is the recent drought from 2012 through the current time period. And this is output from the CSR Masscons by Himanshu Save, and you can see intensification of the drought from 2011 through 2012, 2013, and 2014, based on his Masscons product. Here we show the precipitation anomaly from 1900 to the present. And again, you can see, we were just talking about Colorado. We saw drought conditions around 1990, 87 to 92, wet conditions in the late 90s, and then dry conditions in the early 2000s, drought from 2007 to 9, and the current drought 2012 to 2015. And these are annual outputs of total water storage based on CSR Masscons, APL Masscons. So this was the 2007 to 2009 drought, and then 2010 was near normal, 2011 was anomalously wet, 2012 through 2015 with the current drought. So we see slight differences between the two Masscon products, but we're still working on processing these data. We evaluated groundwater storage in response to the 2007 to 2009 drought earlier. This is a paper working with Laurent Longvern and D. Long. And the groundwater storage depletion from the GRACE data using GRGS product was 30 cubic kilometers approximately between October 2006 and March 2010. And using the water level data, we got about 27 cubic kilometers for a similar time period. So generally good correspondence between estimates from groundwater levels and GRACE data. So to summarize then, GRACE total water storage provides an indicator of water storage and a drought indicator. there seemed to be a lot of emphasis on component storages from GRACE, but I think we should recognize the value of the total water storage product for itself and giving us an assessment of overall water conditions in large regions. Estimation of the groundwater component can be problematic because of large uncertainties in soil moisture storage. But NASA and researchers are working on improving that with the soil moisture active passive product and ground-based monitoring. And there are also uncertainties in estimating groundwater storage from groundwater level monitoring data because especially in stacked aquifers, we've got unconfined aquifers overlying confined aquifers, as in the Central Valley or, for example, the North China Plain. And when we're looking at these data, then I think it's important to try to distinguish natural and anthropogenic drivers of water storage changes, as Bilali emphasized in his recent comment. So summarizing the case study results, then I think in Texas, the total water storage from GRACE showed good correspondence with the Palmer Drought Severity Index and provides an independent indicator of water storage in response to drought. Disaggregating total water storage into the components in Texas was complicated because of large uncertainties in soil moisture storage. However, we know from pumping data that it cannot be all from anthropogenic groundwater pumpers, so there must be either more deeper soil moisture storage contributing or shallow groundwater naturally discharging during drought. The Colorado River Basin study, by extending the data back in time, we were able to put the current drought in the context of longer term droughts in the past, and we see that the basin has been subjected to multi-year droughts at approximately decadal time spans. And in the upper basin, total water storage explained by reservoir and soil moisture storage was explained by reservoir and soil moisture storage, and this is consistent with most of the water use in the basin, in the upper basin, being surface water, 95%. Groundwater storage contributed to total water storage in the lower basin, but it seems like a lot of it is from natural responses to wet and dry cycles. But irrigated agriculture also contributed to depletion in the lower basin. The Central Valley is a small basin close to the coast, so it makes it challenging to analyze it with the GRACE data, but we did see good responses in total water storage 2007 to 2009 drought and the more recent drought. And uncertainties in groundwater storage from water level monitoring results from the fact that when we're looking at water level data, we're not sure whether the wells are screened in unconfined, semi-confined or confined aquifers. So I think the bottom line is that we need to use all the data, monitoring, modeling and remote sensing to try to understand what's going on and to provide input then to people trying to manage water resources in the context of these climate extremes. So the data that I've been talking about, the GRACE data, are provided by the NASA JPL website, the TELUS website, and they provide GRACE monthly mass grids at 1 degree resolution, and also the recent Masscon products is also available from this website. So I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
I think we have to escape. Can you read this?
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to look at the questions. So I hope you enjoyed the Cliffs of Moher in Ireland early on. In the Colorado River Basin, why do the total water storage downward trends seem to start before the dry precipitation anomalies? I think some of that reflects that we are seeing anomalously high total water storage in response to the wet periods. And then as that's moving through the system before what we call is a drought, then we see those pulses of water moving through the system, and I think that's what we're seeing with the total water storage. So Dave Goodrich asks, how have policy lawmakers in Texas received these data, and are the data an easy sell given how obvious the drought was on the surface? I think the GRACE data helps to visualize the total status of water storage in the state, and we're working with the Texas Water Development Board and other lawmakers to try to parlay that. I think Texas has developed many programs in response to the drought, to SWIFT program to subsidize looking at other sources of water in the state, brackish water and others, to make sure that we don't have water shortages in the future, and also managed aquifer recharge. So I think it's been helpful to have the GRACE data to look at the status of total water storage. So Ying Tang has a question: how GRACE removes the seasonal signal, and can you use the monthly GRACE total water storage anomaly to compute the seasonal total water storage change? If so, is the seasonal total water storage change equal to the total water storage anomaly in the last month of the season? So removing seasonal signal, we generally oftentimes remove it either using a least squares fit of semi-annual and annual cycles, or we use a 12-month moving average to remove the seasonal signal to look at the long-term trends. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but maybe we can follow up with you on more details with the analysis of seasonal signals. Yulong Shia has a question about how much contribution is there from snow water equivalent anomaly in the Colorado River Basin. I think what we found, I mean, snow contributes to total water storage changes in the upper basin, but it seems like the snow depletes early on and remains low during the drought periods. So we don't see a continuous decline in stormwater storage throughout the drought, but we see a decline early on, and the snow remains generally low throughout the droughts. The next question is GRACE data publicly available, and if yes, how to get it? Yes, it is publicly available, and I think the best way to get it is through the NASA JPL TELUS site. Another question: can large-scale land subsidence maps derived from INSAR be adapted as scaling factors for GRACE-derived groundwater storage estimates downscaling? Are there any attempts to doing this? I'm afraid I'm not aware of how they are integrating the GRACE data with the INSAR data, but I know JPL is working on this with others at the USGS, Michelle Sneed and JPL scientists, and maybe I would refer you to those people. I can't see any more questions at this time, but there's a prompt that multiple attendees are typing. What specific actions are being done in California? There's a lot of activity in California right now in response to the drought. The state passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, where they're starting to regulate groundwater in the state, and this has a number of specifications where they're trying to move towards more sustainable groundwater management within the next 20 years. Arizona passed the Groundwater Management Act in 1980, and it has really helped improve groundwater situation in the active management areas. And so I think California will move in a similar direction. California has been doing conjunctive use of surface water and groundwater since the 60s, and then managed the aquifer recharge in the southern part of the Central Valley within the past couple of decades. So I think these programs will expand in the future to deal with the drought. Department of Water Resources producing the groundwater level monitoring maps and putting out drought reports and a lot of excellent information. And Claudia Font will be coming out with her regional groundwater modelling report in the near future. Is atmospheric moisture removed from the GRACE signal? Yes, the processing centres remove the effects of atmospheric moisture and also earth tidal impacts and other factors from the GRACE data before are using different types of models. What could be the contribution of canopy water storage in GRACE total water storage? Is it significant? I think previous studies have indicated that a canopy storage provided a small impact on GRACE total water storage, but I can't remember the exact references. I can get back with you on that. My pumpage intensified during drought in Texas, higher than average annual number, and would this be separable from the precipitation anomaly? Yes, we have data on annual pumpage estimates, and they are higher during a drought, but even considering that, it doesn't explain the total water storage decline during the 2011 drought. And we included that in the GRL paper. Is the error associated with the removal of atmospheric mass quantified? Yes, and I think the different processing centres have error estimates associated with that. I don't know if this has answered all the questions. You guys will have to start typing faster. Would aeolian transport affect GRACE in deserts? Anything changing mass would affect the mass changes. I'm not sure that anybody has looked at that in detail, and if it could contribute a lot to the mass storage changes that we see from GRACE. Thanks for all the positive comments. Appreciate it. It's hard to see when you're doing a webinar whether people are comatose or not, or working on 10 other things, so can't gauge the audience participation. What types of changes are the ag producers making in order to improve the situation in California? I think Jay Lund and some other folks at University of California, Davis will probably be better at answering those questions. But what we do see is that managed aquifer recharge and the infrastructure that's available in California, the pipelines and aqueducts, has allowed water to be traded or marketed to higher value water users. So their estimates of economic losses during the drought, $2.7 billion, I think, for their last estimate for the last year, is much less than the $7.6 billion that Texas saw in 2011. And that may be partly explained by the flexibility that they have with moving water around with the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project aqueducts, and trading water among users using managed aquifer recharge and groundwater banking. And what we've seen in Arizona is that water is moving from agriculture to urban settings in the Phoenix area, and so I think seeing those transitions also moving to higher economic value uses. So Emily, I think maybe I'm not sure.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up. I don't know if anybody else has anything to do this afternoon, but Bridget probably does.
No, but I'd be glad. You can feel free to email me, and I'd be glad to try to answer any questions anybody else may have. And thanks for listening in. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and be sure to listen in next Friday for Justin Huntington from Desert Research Institute. He'll be talking about drought and sort of recycled ET, water, soil moisture recycling, I think. And it should be a good one. And I want to thank Bridget for a great presentation on GRACE today. So thanks, everybody.
Have a good weekend. Bye.